Good afternoon, everybody. I think we can start. I'm sure everyone else will join in as soon as they can. And of course, we have the recording available. Good afternoon again. My name is Nisa Pear. I'm the Manager of Communications and Visibility for RESEMBID. Also on the screen is Indy McClymont Lafayette, who is a Communications and Visibility Officer. And together we will go through the requirements for the communications and visibility aspect of your projects. I'm sure most of you would have attended the very informative session this morning on the budget preparation. So our session will be just about an hour. And we will take you through, like I said, those requirements and of course field any questions that you may have. So I will turn over to Indy, who will give a brief overview of comms as a whole. What are the strategic requirements for comms and visibility for your projects and by extension the RESEMBID program. And then I would go into detail with the communications and visibility template that everyone is expected to fill out, and then of course field questions thereafter. So I turn over to you, Indy.
Thanks very much, Lisa. Let me just share my screen. 1 second. Okay. So thanks again for joining, everyone. I am very happy to be sharing with you today, walking through. Well, it's basically three things that we will use this hour for. We will be looking at our strategic communications and the approach that RESEMBID takes towards that. And then we will go into detail on the CMV plans and open up for discussion. Primarily, I will go through a few slides with you. If there are any burning questions, then feel free to, uh, raise a hand and ask. But we would prefer if, we hold questions for a little and then we go into the discussion segment. Nisa, though, I'll ask you to help me with the um if there are any hands raised because I can't see it while I'm presenting.
No problem.
Okay, so let me start with just sharing the approach that RESEMBID takes towards communications and visibility. For us, it is a very key and strategic part of the project implementation cycle. And, part of what we've observed, well, with some projects, persons might think, oh, communications, we can just do something at the start and at the end, and that's it. But we that's not the approach that RESEMBID wants to have with the projects that we undertake, because we realize that it is a critical part of sharing what the project achieves and its impact. What when it's properly incorporated throughout the project implementation cycle. And I know one of the things that at times I've gotten with projects that I've worked on over the years is that, oh boy, communications is adding just a whole other element and it's so much more work, and there's resistance to doing it. But what we're proposing is that when the communications and visibility is incorporated throughout, it does not it does not become a heavy something that's heavy um for persons to manage, because it's more a seamless transition rather than something that you have to keep remembering to do. So RESEMBID places a lot of value on ensuring that, communications and visibility is properly implemented into the project implementation cycle. Now, I know that many persons here would be already familiar with the EU visibility guidelines. And most of what RESEMBID, our communications guidelines, reflect quite a lot of what is already in the visibility guidelines. But I'll just highlight here the document for those who may not be or have had the chance to look at it yet. Now, this is your Bible that you walk with, throughout the project implementation, ensuring that whatever you're doing regarding comms and visibility, you check this, and you will see here that it's quite thorough. It goes through a range of um, products and outputs that you would be considering under your project, and how to incorporate. So, for example, if you're doing a website, how do you approach that? What do you do with the branding, the accreditation for EU, and so on? So, we encourage everybody to know this like the back of your hand, or be very familiar with the contents so that you can incorporate, ensure that whatever you're doing is in line. Of course, you would also have to um, share your communications outputs with us at RESEMBID before dissemination, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later. But it will save everybody time if what is shared fits in with the visibility EU visibility guidelines, as well as the guidelines that we have produced. Now, it's a requirement that the communications and visibility templates accompany all applications. And Nisa will go through in detail on this, but I just wanted to highlight a few things um, for those who, just to highlight a few areas. Now, the essential things such as the project name, duration, who is doing it, that's all comes early up, you know. But basically, we give a range of tools for grantees to look at and say what would work best with the project that I have. So it's not a case where we're expecting everybody to do all the things that are highlighted in the CMV plans. But we want to really get some guided thinking to say, okay, I'm doing a project on marine biodiversity. What are the things that, or how best do I create visibility with this? Is it that I take a strong social media approach to most of this, or would I make it more where I try to engage traditional media, invite them to see the coral reefs? How do I engage and get visibility and publicity? So it's thinking through and saying, okay, all right, I'll do some press releases, I'll do social media and a few videos too. And that will be the core of my communications and visibility planning. So once you've sort of outlined what you want to do, then you go through the matrix and elaborate why this is so critical. Um, Usually we find, of course, that what's reflected in the matrix has to be aligned with the budget. From some of the applications that we've reviewed to date, that sometimes can be a gap or a weak area for grantees. So they have a lovely range of communication products that they have decided they want to do. But when it comes to the budgeting now, you will find that, okay, so we want to do 3 videos for the year that the project is in effect. However, they may budget for a videographer, but not necessarily enough time that to encapsulate both the videography and the editing of the video. Or they may budget for the videographer, but not put any time for it to be aired, whether on TV or promoted on social media. So I'm just flagging that it's very important when you're going through the CMV plans to ensure that the budget that's there and the activity matrix lines up. So, just paying attention to that level of detail. I have indicated already that the materials must be in line with the manual and share that. But it's also critical to know that part of the expectations with visibility and branding, and Nisa will share our branding guidelines, talk a little bit about that when I hand over to her. But we do expect representation. So for example, we do ask that for you have an opening launch and a closing launch, and if that's an in-person or even a virtual, we do want to see that RESEMBID and the EU and all our partners are branded and highlighted at whatever event is held. So that's one thing that we tend to want to highlight. Now, some persons are what we've observed of some of the applications that we've looked at. Some persons, some grantees veer towards traditional media and sometimes are hesitant about social media, or when they incorporate social media, they put it as a part of in kind, but not necessarily adding the element of boosting the post and having targeted social media presence. So I just want to highlight that those are some of the things that we are looking out for. If you are doing social media, you can or should allocate some funds to boosting your posts where necessary, to ensure that you get maximum mileage and visibility. I have touched on this somewhat already, the ensuring that all your costs are accounted for. One other popular one that we tend to see is that persons indicate, yes, they're having a launch press conference, but when you look in the budget, there's no cost um, allocated for a venue or refreshments. Or if what we say is if you're going to be you may already have an office space that you can use for that, then indicate that these costs will be in kind, but don't just leave it out. So it does take a little thinking through some of the associated things, and Nisa and I are here to help if persons have queries or need clarifications, but so just highlighting a few things that we tend to pick up. Okay, Nisa, I think I hand over to you here. Let me stop sharing. Oh, shoot.
Okay, I should be sharing now, yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Andy, for the introduction to why we are doing this in the first place, why we're here. So as I mentioned, and as Indy mentioned, I'm going to take this opportunity to do a deep dive into the actual template that you will be required to fill out. At this point, should you have any questions, feel free to write it in the chat, raise your hand, and Indy will let me know, and I can field the question from there. So as we did mention, this part is quite self-explanatory in, filling out the information required of your project, of course, your organization name, project code, etc. Sorry, what has been added to this that is not yet on this template, but in the template to be shared with you is an executive summary of your project. And that is the same summary that you will use in your product. You can fit here. So again, on the version that is on the website and that you will receive does have that additional component. So we encourage you to fill that out. As Indy mentioned, the Communications and Visibility Manual from the EU is also attached to this. So of course you can just click on it and it does take you to that comprehensive document that we do like to call the Bible, that again takes you into it, again, just like this conversation, gives a broad overview of, why we're here, why we're doing this. Of course, recognizing the EU as the donor is most important and will be reflected in the different products that you produce. So as mentioned, if you do social media, electronic newsletters, videos, etc., it is all here, so that you can use this as a guide to not to determine which products you use, or which outputs you produce, but when you decide on what they are, then you can come into this as well as liaising with us and the RESEMBID brand guideline that I will speak about later on. That's what you use this for. But this really governs, in as much as this governs your visibility activities, it also governs ours. So what we've done in this section is in acknowledging that not everyone who is undergoing this, any of these projects, may be aware of what the different required elements are. We really have tried to make it very user friendly, kind of a plug and play. So everybody has heard the term, let's say, press release. But you may not if your area of focus is not communications. If you are part of a fishing community or an NGO, whatever it is, communications may not be your wheelhouse, which is fine. And that's what this table is for. It really does explain, when and why you would use some of these tools. So for example, when and why you do a press release. So press releases are encouraged throughout the life of the program, but they are required for the start and the end of your project. And of course, to advise of any conclusions, results, etc. Press conferences as well, to launch the project as well as to close. Those are the two required ones, just like the press releases. But should your project call for it, you are more than welcome to have press conferences in between based on the content of your project. Again, interviews and appearances. Now, this is not required, but it is, certainly encouraged, again, based on the content of your project. Now, for most markets in the Caribbean, these things come free. But in terms of interviews, morning shows, etc. But for those that have a payment element, make sure that you research this before and add it into your budget, so that will be captured after. Um, this regardless of project content, because of course everybody wants to know that that the project was successful, but also what is success. Whether it is 100 children learning about resilience, or a farm of queen conch being restored. These are the things that you need to communicate, because for a lot of people, okay, if your introductory press release says X project in Aruba receives €100,000, that doesn't necessarily translate into benefits. So we do encourage highlighting success stories, and of course being very clear on what success looks like. Just as the same with testimonials. If let's say for the example I just gave of 100 children being the recipients or beneficiaries of a particular program, figure out ways to highlight them, of course, being conscious of whether there are minors involved, if there's a gender component, and the language that you use as well would inform that. So, for example, again, in the case with if there are children involved with your project, certainly if you want to highlight them as part of your beneficiary stories or testimonials, etc., certainly seek to get parental or parent or guardian permission. We will explore later on as projects progress a gender component, because we do want to be sensitive in our language and inclusive. So, for example, the knee-jerk reaction is to say something like fishermen, versus we're aware that there are fisher women, fisher folk involved in communities, so we encourage using inclusive language like that. Photographs, always a great tool, whether it is they are for your press releases and certainly for social media. We really do encourage people to have photographs to document their projects. We also encourage, as far as possible, to hire professional photographers, so you do get these quality pictures from the media aspect. Better quality pictures means that more likely to be placed in newspapers, etc., and certainly online. So do not be afraid to include photography services into the budget, which we will get down into later on. The same goes for videos. Whether it is you want to have a wrap-up video, something in the middle, to really highlight and showcase what this is about, especially with your project in motion. So, on the ground, doing your different activities, these videos are quite essential. Be conscious, though, of where you plan on placing these videos, and the length of the video. So if, for example, something you put on TV can certainly be longer than something that you plan to post on social media. Social media, we wouldn't encourage anything longer than 2 minutes, just because we know people's attention spans have shortened, but you have a little bit more freedom on TV. So again, just like the photographer, we do encourage, finding a videographer who will not just record, but ensure that the editing and production of whatever the material is also factored into the video. Coming down to the end of this, so brochures, studies, and publications, again, completely dependent on what your project is about. There are some that part of the project requirement is to produce studies and publications, so certainly encourage that. And though we are an environmentally sensitive program, we do acknowledge that a lot of communication in the Caribbean remains paper-based. So if you do need to produce brochures, we understand the cultural sensitivities around that, and it being a very useful tool. So we would therefore encourage, if you can do things like seek out recycled paper and stuff like that. In some places, maybe you could use QR codes, things, but so we, again, understanding that the complexities, but trying to work within environmentally friendly processes. So social media obviously is very important for all projects. Again, the content of which will be determined by the makeup and the content of your project. But certainly, in every market, social media is there's a high penetration, so we encourage use. And again, this is where we would encourage things like using the videos, quality pictures, etc., and really highlighting the stories of impact, in addition to fact-based information, for example, the dollar value of your project, etc. And lastly, should your project require a website, again, encouraged to use. Please factor in the cost of not just development of the website, but certainly maintenance into your budget. And the EU visibility guideline document, which is again attached to this, and it's keep repeating it, it's also right there at the bottom. It does quite good guidelines for producing your website, etc. So I will stop here and ask if there are any questions before we head into the activity matrix and the budget.
Not
Indeed, do we have
seeing
any questions
anything.
yet?
No, not seeing anything at the moment, Lisa.
Okay, sure. Okay, so this is where what we've gone through above translates into actual activity. So this is where you let us know in a concrete way what you are planning to do in terms of your communications and visibility activities when you are planning
Lisa,
to. Sure.
1 second. I do see that it's a little small. A request for it to be made a
Sure,
little bigger.
not a problem. It should be a bit better, yes?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, so right, as I was saying, this is where you tell us what and when you plan on doing it, and the budget below that, of course, we will go through that outlines how we are going to pay for it, and of course, what it costs. So as we mentioned above, press conferences are required, specifically at the start and end of your project. But again, should it be necessary, should it be beneficial for your project, we certainly encourage to do them throughout the life of the project. I know Indy mentioned it, but I will mention again here that when you are planning, assuming that your press conference is in person, I mean, virtual is fine. You literally just need a strong internet connection. But if you are doing in-person press conferences, we certainly encourage you to, make sure you factor in the cost of a venue if there is one. If you need audiovisual equipment, minor refreshments, all of these things should certainly be factored into the cost of the press conference. Press releases, again, just as we would have identified before, very important, particularly to the start and the end of the project. But like the press conferences, very much encouraged to do during the life of the project, because of course, as many projects begin to roll out across the region from RESEMBID, you don't want yours to kind of get lost in the shuffle. So we do encourage continued communication with your audiences, the media being the key one, and of course your stakeholders, people on social media, and you're free to post press releases, for example, onto social media. Project leaflet, we would have just identified why and where you use that, of course, being conscious of environmental sensitivities. The media interviews, same as before, we do recommend it, not so much required, again, based on the market and the project. That being said, radio communication is quite important to the OCTs. So should you have good relationships with radio stations, or which ones are the best in your market, we would absolutely encourage you to do radio interviews there as well. So vertical banners and signage in general. So it says recommended here because all projects may not necessarily require it. However, we do absolutely encourage you to, as far as possible, have this signage, whether it is for your in-person activations, certainly for virtual events, you have a branded background, but we absolutely do encourage vertical banners particularly for field work, so that when the photographs are taken either by your photographer or the media photographer, we still have signage captured at all angles. The project letterhead, should your project call for it, we do absolutely encourage that as well, so that when you have your formal communication, whether it is with your stakeholders, with media, etc., you kind of give that extra layer of visibility and credence to your project. All of these things, which I will go through in detail again underneath when we talk about the brand guidelines, to be developed in tandem with the RESEMBID comms team. So we don't just leave you to develop it and hope you do it correctly. We are always in touch with applicants and grantees to ensure that, one, they understand what is required, and of course, when these products are developed, we are right there with you to make sure that it's being done correctly. Right, and of course, as the headlines on the headings on the top indicate, you will be required at this point to let us know, not just that you're going to do it, but the amount that you're going to do, whether it's 6 press releases, 3 pull-up banners, whatever it is, and an expected timeline of when along your project life cycle we can expect these things. And the same go everything else we would have discussed before in terms of branded promotional materials, your human interest stories on social media, etc. And here, very importantly for social media, we do encourage you to at this point think about how often are you going to interact on social media, and really begin to quantify in this table what your activities are. Now, as this last line indicates, this is an indicative tool. So these are the general products that for projects like this, people generally produce. However, if you have some amazing idea, we have one of the applicants who I'm sure is on this call had a fantastic idea of doing a TEDx style event. Of course, that's something very specific. We don't have it on this table, but you are absolutely encouraged to, should it suit your project and your project objectives, we're absolutely encouraging you at the end of this, continue to add to these rows any of your own ideas. So I will move on lastly to the budget, and then I can field some questions. So as we've said before, it is really important that all of the activities above in the activity matrix that we just gone through, that they are captured in this budget. So, as both Indy and I would have said, okay, you have a cameraman, make sure that this person is not just their fee is not just to come and record and send you raw footage. Ensure that the cost that you have in this budget includes editing, packaging, etc. Same with the photographer. So what we've seen several times with the graphic designer services is that people have budgeted items for pull-up banners and for brochures, etc. And they've accounted for the cost of those things, but not somebody has to design it. So make sure that, again, as we would have said, that the cost of labor to produce any of these things is accounted for. There is you are allowed to have flex in your budget for a communication specialist. We totally understand and accept that a lot of applicants, simply do not. Communications is just like marine biology or whatever you do is its own set field. We expect the same of communication. So if you realize, look, we can't do this on our own, we need a subject matter expert to be brought in here, you are absolutely encouraged and welcome to bring in a communication specialist. That being said, ensure that in working with this communication specialist, they know all of your intended output. So for example, you would show them the activity matrix, or he or she would help to develop the activity matrix just above, and make sure that all of the activities you plan to do are captured in the amount of days that this expert is, or this communication specialist is required. Because of course you don't want to have this person on board and you've only accounted for 10 days when you really need them for 25. So again, that is something that you sit and work through with them, but you are more than it's more than acceptable to have a communication specialist as part of your budget. And lastly, again, as we would have said, and I know Indy mentioned that we do encourage where possible and where necessary, that yeah, especially when you are now developing, let's say, a social media page that may not have enough followers or a lot of followers, we do encourage in your posting and in your planning of the post that you're going to do, you can do, the paid, the sponsored posts and whatnot to ensure the reach so that, you don't want to do all these great videos and you don't necessarily have the audience just yet to your social media pages. So not only would you account above for the amount of social media posting you're going to do, here you will capture if you are going to do any sponsored posts, how much it will cost over, what amount of time, how many weeks, etc. And lastly, again, this is indicative. So if you have other costs that you need to factor in, you are encouraged to add them here. And for print and radio, again, if let's say you've done the good thing, you've had the graphic designer develop, let's say, a newspaper ad, you still have to pay to print it. So this has to be captured here as well as, I would have mentioned radio spots, whether it is their interviews or if you develop, let's say, a short ad or whatever it is, note that there's a cost for production as well as a cost for placement on the ad. Again, I know this is a lot, so we will help you work through the CNV plan. So you submit a draft to us, we review it along with your, the relevant program manager, and we will get this back to you in with our edits and and making sure that this takes the shape it needs to before it moves on. Right. So we do have one other element of this. So you handle your project communications, but there's a second layer of communications. So there's called the central level communications. So, and this is to be directly supported and, working with you, we will produce this communication. So what does this mean? Essentially, the project communication that you will handle, it deals very centrally with all of the good things that come out of your project, etc. But RESEMBID wants to take that a step further where we, your budget cannot be changed when you've submitted and we've approved your budget, your CNV budget as well as your overall project budget. We can't change it. Therefore, that's why we encourage you to really dig down into this and make sure that everything is captured. That being said, what happens very often in projects like this is that, you think you've got everything covered and then you go into, this school district or some community or, we have park rangers that have this amazing story that we didn't really, one, know about before, or two, account for telling these stories when we work through the CNV plans and the budget. So what this allows us to do is that RESEMBID looks at your allocation for communications and visibility, and we add on a small percentage of that allows us to then, during the project implementation, allows us to capture any of those additional stories, and really bring even more shape to your project. That being said, this central level communications budget is, again, it is very much smaller than the approved CNV budget because you will be doing the heavy lifting. So it is a smaller budget, but it's also, as I said, for the storytelling element. So we cannot, after approval, allocate more money for T-shirts or materials like that. This really is for a storytelling element. That yes, the funds are housed within RESEMBID, but we will also not produce any stories or go into communities, countries, etc., without ensuring that we've first spoken to your project heads and really develop these stories with you. So it continues to not be about us. We just want to add on this extra layer of communication and storytelling, which of course will be directed by you. So as we would have mentioned, actually I'll stop here. Are there any questions on the template itself?
Actually, yes, Nissa, I see a hand up from
Sure.
support.
Hi, good
Can you
afternoon.
go ahead with your question, please?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Raisa, for this detailed overview. I
Sure.
think just back to your question, to your points about the budget. As you mentioned, sometimes we do face some constraints to complete all the activities in the plan internally, that we may outsource some of these activities to perhaps either a person or an agency. And when we do that, I think it is challenging to clearly identify in that level of detail how many days or what amount a unit cost may be for producing a video or to have a photographer at an event. Whereas if we are contracting with an agency to complete a certain number of outputs within a total budget of X, then we can say these are the deliverables for X amount. That how would we reflect that kind of an arrangement in the budget for an external agency?
Sure, good question. And I think it can be reflected in the same way. So for example, you can put where we had communication specialist, um, and you put, so I imagine that cost, that agency cost is going to be the singular cost that you would place in the budget. However, you still have to outline exactly what you're planning to do. And the agency must be able to tell you, they're not just going to give you a blanket cost of, let's say, off the top of my head, 50,000 euro. They must be, particularly because they will be using external suppliers, they must be able to break down the cost of these tangible assets. Um, so even though you may have an overall figure for this external assistance, at some point they must be able to tell you, okay, pull-up banners are going to cost X. We recommend, and remember, you're using the photographer, etc., based on the activities that you've outlined in the matrix above. So if you know that you plan to have 5 events that need coverage for a photographer, you can still get that. So you're not going to, even if you use an external agency who can help you to develop the matrix above, it still has to be, you can't let them just kind of get carried away. If you say you're going to do 5 events, they don't need to charge you for a photographer for 10 events, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think just a follow-up question on that. I think
Sure.
what we're trying to do is put out what we would like in terms of the outputs or the deliverables for the agency, and then we have to go to bid, right? Because we have to see who's willing to step up to do these 10 things within that budget. So that's, I think, where we are, just trying to work through the details right now.
Right. So once and again, if you outlined 10 things and you send us your draft CNV plan and we kind of look at it and we say, maybe you should have 12 things or 9 things. That is also where you can take that kind of finalized version of your, proposed activities and say, right, this is what we need the branding agency to do. And whether or not they cost it or you do, at least we have an idea of what activities will be done when. Who puts it together in terms of if it's an agency, somebody in-house, a specialist, that is certainly determined by you. But from our end, we would still, agency or not, need to see, what those 10 outputs, as you said, what they are. That's really, really the most important thing for us.
Just to add though, Nissa, that once a note is made to indicate that, an agency or a comms person will be contracted to do the above or whatever, so that we have an idea of how you're approaching it. Because it can be confusing if we just see a lump figure under com specialist without us being clear of what the person will be doing. So if you sort of give us an idea that these are the things that the comms person would be doing from earlier up in the matrix, then we're okay because we see that reflected in the budget. So just as long as it's clearly articulated, that would be helpful.
Thanks, Cindy. Any other questions before we go on? Okay. Okay, so the final piece of this puzzle is the RESEMBID brand guideline book. So as I mentioned, we are not going to kind of let you off into the wilderness and try your best to get this done without some sort of tool. So that is essentially what this is for, as well as as we keep mentioning, the EU visibility guideline guideline document. So this really goes into, let me see if I can get this bigger. This really goes into the rules that govern RESEMBID in terms of our look and feel, right? So of course you would know our logo, but this allows you to understand how to use this logo, when to do it, the different versions of the logo, so that when you are putting together your output, so whether it is the same brochure or some piece of signage, you do not necessarily have to come to us at the inception stage and to figure out how to do it, because you can use this guideline to produce something and then you send it to us for approval. Same thing here, when to use the stack logo versus our horizontal logo. So again, depending on the item that you're producing, you would know which one to use. Again, this is also really helpful for any graphic artist or any printer or anybody that you will be using to execute these things, as well as once everything is approved and we've sent this to you, this package also includes all versions of this logo in all file types, so that again you don't necessarily have to, we can cut down the time in terms of production, and you can go ahead and produce things, of course, with our approval of design, without worrying about whether or not you use the right logo. And then of course just different ways to use it. So as important as how to use it correctly, it's also letting you know how when it's incorrectly used. So the brand guideline book also tells you, when not putting it over imagery, removing the elements, so it can't just be RESEMBID, or distorting the logo. Sometimes it's really easy to do if you're doing it on a letterhead or something and it gets distorted. And then of course rearranging the elements, because the circular part of the logo is meant to come first. So again, this is for you to, just like the EU Bible, this is the RESEMBID Bible. And then we also don't have you guessing about colors. This does outline the colors used in the logo itself. And this is generally for us secondary colors, but you would need to know these four, because these make up the RESEMBID logo. And then, of course, importantly, the typography that we use. That being said, because we're sending you full logo files, you may not necessarily need all of this, but should anything need to be done manually, your graphic artist has access to these elements. What should be completed that is not on this document yet is when you produce things, what they should look like. So examples of, let's say, a t-shirt. So if we take this this screen as an example of a t-shirt, what the other elements of this brand guideline book would tell you is that the let's say if you have your project logo goes on the left breast, RESEMBID goes on the right, and the logo, our logo bar, which I will show you in our slide, that goes on the back. So again, we will tell you how to do it on, let's say, a t-shirt or a water bottle or whatever it is. But just like the template, should anything not be there that you would like to produce, you are welcome to do that and pass the design to us. And then, of course, we will approve. And that brings us to the end of our session in terms of us telling you what to do. So please, if there are any questions, now is the time. I'm not seeing any hands or any messages, so I'm going to take that to mean that everybody in here is a comms expert and they do not need any more tips and tricks. But again, even if you don't have questions now, you can certainly email us at the comms at RESEMBID email address. India and I remain available. Robbie, I do see your hand up, so I will get to that. Yeah, so if you have any questions after that, please feel free, as well as, of course, we will send you, the presentation that does include, and you will get the template, etc. So if anything comes to you as it tends to at the end of the call, please feel free. Okay, so I see a hand up from Robbie.
Thank you. This is a very informative session. Thank you very much. There are certain services out there where you can pay for an annual fee, for example, and submit a press release, and then they'll distribute it different news outlets, etc., and all that. Would that be something that could be included in this?
Yeah, sure. So, did you mean internationally, regionally? How would you, or just as an idea?
Yes, I meant all of those things.
Okay. Okay, yeah. I mean, so there are two levels of RESEMBID comms. So obviously, India and I spearhead the communication for the program itself, and then we help the project communications. But ultimately, the projects are yours. So if you want to use some sort of subscription service, sure, absolutely. What I would encourage though is make sure that it is not one of these kind of generic services that your press release goes all over and it may not land anywhere because the recipients aren't really targets. So if you do go that route, I would encourage working with that subscription service to make sure that your content is targeted and that it does increase the chances of being picked up where it needs to be.
And just to add to that, Nisa, that we really do want to see in-country visibility or regional visibility. I mean, between the OCTs where possible. That's one of the things that we are looking at monitoring and tracking for our reporting purposes as well. So while we do encourage as wide dissemination as possible, we also want to ensure that within country the message is getting there. And one of the things that we have been monitoring is OCT pickup of releases so far, and it's not as strong as we'd like it to be. So that's why I'm also flagging that now, that as much as possible, we want to ensure that we do see visibility in the OCTs themselves.
Excellent. I thank you both for those answers, and I agree. Those CTs are important, but I don't think we should ignore the big picture as well and all. Yeah. But the OCTs first. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, you want to make sure that the people of the countries in which these great projects are, that they know that these things are happening. The old adage, charity begins at home. But of course, Robbie is absolutely correct. We don't want to, this is a big global village, and we do want to get this information there as much as possible. So again, encourage, but without the forgetting that the home crowd. Okay, I see another hand up from Peter Paul.
Hi, good afternoon. I wonder along the same lines, I mean, do you have a library of videos that have been produced as part of the RESEMBID projects that we can have a look at, or, success stories ideal, really good examples of social media marketing, things like that, that can help us? Do you have a library that we can access?
We don't yet because our comms really is centered on the project activities. That being said, if you go on India, I don't know if you're able to share the YouTube link to our channel in the chat, but we do have a few videos there, and some very much in development. But I think the ones that are there on the YouTube, on the RESEMBID YouTube channel, and if it's not in the chat, you can go look for it. I believe if you just type RESEMBID, it's going to come up. But we do have some great videos there, particularly of our project managers, program managers who would have spoken very passionately and directly to the three areas of focus. And I think those are three really good examples of how you can, deal with a topic that is, that is engaging, etc. Because it's not just the visual images of them speaking. It does include some imagery, and I think some music. So I think those are really good examples of what you can do. And of course, as we develop more content, as we are now really heading into implementation, we will be happy to share that as well.
They are surrounded by water.
Okay, do we have any more questions before we wrap up? Okay, so I'm not seeing any hands up or any more questions in the chat.
But one thing, Nissa, let me just add that we will be having some additional workshops coming up soon where we will be looking at, project implementation. So we could also work to have some examples to share for our upcoming workshops for the applicants.
Okay, well, thank you so very much, everyone, we came in at the perfect time. It was meant to be 2 to 3, and at 2:59, we're wrapping up. So thank you so much again for your participation. Again, if you have any questions that may come to mind after this session, Indy, if you could just type the comms email into the chat, please feel free to do so. Julia has also put, I believe the recording is going to be in the chat, but we also have a survey that we'd like you to take. So please don't forget that, because of course the surveys only help us to make these sessions better, and we're open to all of your recommendations. So thank you again. Thank you, and your congratulations on getting this far in your projects, and we certainly look forward to working with you as you develop your template and of course rolling out all your activities across the OCTs for your projects. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.